The water of Lake Solstice was not merely cold. It was a living, devouring entity that tasted of ancient graves. Callista's lungs burned with the ferocity of a forest fire, a stark contrast to the numbness creeping up her extremities. 14. She had dragged 14 bodies onto the jagged shelf of the remaining ice. Her fingers were raw, the nails torn, bleeding into the white snow. But the count was wrong. One left. She dove back into the black abyss. The silence under the surface was deafening, broken only by the frantic thrumming of her own heart. Down in the gloom, a shadow sank, heavy, armored, resigned. She grabbed the fur of his cloak, her muscles screaming in protest, and kicked toward the fractured light above. Breaking the surface, she gasped, dragging the final weight onto the shore. It was only when the moonlight hit the silver embroidery on his drenched coat that the terror truly set in. This wasn't just a wolf. This was Theron, the Alpha King, the man who had exiled her mother, the tyrant who ruled with a heart of frost. And he wasn't breathing. The infirmary smelled of pine antiseptic and wet wool, a scent that would forever remind Callista Fire of the moment her life fractured. The chaos of the lakeshore had faded into a dull, throbbing ache behind her eyes. She sat on the edge of a narrow cot, a thick woolen blanket draped over her shoulders, her hands trembling around a mug of herbal tea that had long since gone cold. "You need to sleep, Callista," her father said. Aemon, the pack beta, paced the small room like a caged animal. He was a man of rigid lines and greying temples, a man who had spent his life bowing to power to keep his fragmented family safe. "The healers have treated your frostbite. The pack is calling you a saint." Callista let out a dry, humorless laugh. "A saint? For doing what any of us should have done? For diving into the void 15 times, Aemon hissed, stopping in front of her. His eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of pride and terrified awe. "Do you understand the politics of this girl? You saved the Elder Council. You saved the Gamma's heir, and—" He lowered his voice, glancing at the heavy oak door. "You saved him." The king. The memory of Theron's face, pale as death, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his lips blue, flashed in her mind. When she had pressed her hands to his chest, pushing the water from his lungs, she hadn't felt the spark of the divine right of kings. She had felt a jagged scar beneath his shirt, a rhythm of a heart that beat slowly, stubbornly, refusing to yield even to death. "Is he awake?" Callista asked, her voice rasping. "No," Aemon said. "The royal guards have barricaded the West Wing. No one goes in or out. Rumors are spreading, Callista. They say the ice didn't just break. They say it was sung open. Sorcery." Callista stiffened. Magic was forbidden in the Silverblood territory, punishable by execution. If the ice had been sabotaged, then the collapse of the frozen lake during the winter solstice ceremony wasn't a tragedy. It was a regicide attempt. And she had ruined it. "I need to go home," she whispered, standing up. Her legs felt like lead. "You can't," a new voice cut through the air. The door swung open. Standing there was not a healer, but High Guard Silas, a wolf built like a boulder, his hand resting on the hilt of a silver-tipped blade. His expression was unreadable. "The Alpha King has awakened. He has summoned the Beta's daughter." Aemon stepped in front of her, his submissive instincts warring with his paternal ones. "She is exhausted, Silas. She nearly died. Surely the king can wait until morning." "The king doesn't wait," Silas said, his eyes locking onto Callista. "And he does not ask twice." Callista placed a hand on her father's arm, feeling the tension radiating off him. "It's okay, Dad. I'll go." "Callista, if he wanted me dead, he wouldn't send a guard. He'd send an executioner." She tried to sound brave, but her stomach twisted. She tightened the blanket around her shoulders and stepped forward. "Lead the way." The walk to the royal wing was a blur of stone corridors and hushed whispers. Servants pressed themselves against the walls as she passed, their eyes wide. She wasn't just Callista the Beta's daughter anymore. She was the girl who walked into the water and came back. Silas opened the double doors to the king's chambers. The room was massive, dominated by a fireplace, roaring with flames that did little to chase away the inherent chill of the stone. In the center was a 4-poster bed, made of dark obsidian wood. And there he was. Theron Wolfe sat on the edge of the bed, wearing nothing but loose black trousers. His chest was bandaged, the white linen stark against his sun-deprived skin. He looked nothing like the rumors, monstrous, beastly. He looked human, devastatingly so. His features were sharp, aristocratic, but his eyes were the color of a winter storm, grey, turbulent, and predatory. He didn't stand when she entered. He didn't speak. He just watched her, his gaze dissecting her layer by layer until she felt stripped of her blanket and defenses. "Close the door," Theron commanded. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding under a boot. Silas bowed and retreated, the heavy latch clicking shut with the finality of a prison sentence. Callista stood her ground near the entrance. She was a Beta's daughter, trained to lower her eyes, to bare her neck in submission, but the adrenaline of the lake still hummed in her blood. She met his gaze. "You summoned me, Alpha," she said. Theron tilted his head. "You are Aemon's girl, the one with the fire in her bloodline." "Callista," she corrected. "Callista." He tested the name, tasting it. He stood up slowly, wincing slightly as his bruised ribs protested. He was tall, looming over her as he crossed the room. The heat radiating off him was intense, a furnace in the cold room. "Tell me, Callista, why am I alive?" She blinked. "I pulled you out." "I know that," he snapped, closing the distance until he was inches from her. "I recall the water. I recall the darkness. But the reports say you pulled 15 wolves from the deep." 15. He looked down at her hands, scarred and raw. "And the Count says I was the 15th. Callista's breath hitched. "You were. Why? Why what? Why was I last?" Theron's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Did you hesitate? Did you weigh the crown against the cold? Did you think perhaps that if you left me a moment longer, the Beta class might rise in the vacuum I left behind?" The accusation hung in the air, sharp as a knife. Callista felt a spark of anger ignite in her chest, burning away the fear. "I didn't know it was you," she lied. Theron's eyes narrowed. He took a step closer, invading her space, his scent, wood smoke and ozone, enveloping her. "Liar. Everyone knows my cloak. Everyone knows my scent. The water washes away scent, and the dark hides colors." She shot back, stepping into him rather than backing away. "And even if I had known, it wouldn't have changed the order." Theron froze. "Explain." "The first wolf was a pup, the Gamma's son. He had no fat to keep him warm. He would have died in seconds," Callista said, her voice steady. "The next were the elders. Frail. Weak. Then the mothers." She looked up at him, her chin high. "You are the Alpha King. You are the strongest among us. You have the blood of the ancients. If anyone could survive the weight, it was you. I saved them first because they needed me more. I saved you last because I trusted you to hold on." Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Theron stared at her, his expression shifting from suspicion to something unreadable. Something intense. "You gambled with the life of your king, based on a theory of biological resilience," he murmured. "I gambled on the strength of a wolf," she corrected. "Was I wrong?" Theron held her gaze for a long moment, the air crackling between them. Then, unexpectedly, the corner of his lip quirked up. It wasn't a smile. It was a bare showing of teeth, a predator amused by its prey. "No," he said softly. "You were not wrong." He reached out, his fingers brushing the raw skin of her cheek. The touch sent a jolt of electricity through her that had nothing to do with fear. "But now we have a problem, Callista Fire. You have saved my life. By the old laws, I owe you a debt." "I ask for nothing," she said quickly. "It doesn't matter what you ask. The debt exists." His face hardened again, the amusement vanishing. "And because you pulled me from the water, you have made yourself an enemy of whoever put me in there." Callista went cold. "You know who did it?" "I have my suspicions," Theron said, turning toward the window that overlooked the frozen, moonlit lake. The ice was cut, chemically weakened. It was a trap designed to wipe out the lineage in one stroke. You, little savior, reached into the jaws of their trap and broke its teeth. He turned back to her, his face grim. "You cannot go home to your father. It isn't safe. As of tonight, you belong to the Obsidian Palace." "As a prisoner?" Callista asked, her heart hammering. Theron stepped back into the shadows, his eyes gleaming. As bait. The following morning, Callista learned that belonging to the palace meant being thrust into a world far more dangerous than the freezing lake. She was moved into a suite of rooms adjacent to the royal library, quarters far too lavish for a beta, which immediately set the court whispering. She wasn't allowed to leave the wing without an escort. Theron had assigned Silas to her, a constant, silent shadow. "Does he think the assassins are hiding in the linen closets?" Callista muttered, pacing the length of her room. She wore a dress of dark blue velvet, a gift, or a uniform, sent by the king's steward. It hugged her curves and restricted her movement, a stark contrast to her practical trousers and boots. "The king thinks assassins are everywhere, Lady Callista," Silas rumbled from the doorway, "because usually they are." "Don't call me lady. I'm a beta. You're the king's ward now. Rank is fluid." Before she could argue, the heavy oak doors swung open. A woman swept in, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume and rot. It was Lady Vespera, the alpha female of the southern clans, a woman who had been vying for Theron's mate bond for years. Vespera was beautiful in the way a diamond is beautiful, hard, sharp, and cold. Her blonde hair was coiled in intricate braids, and her eyes were a piercing green. "So this is the little mermaid," Vespera purred, circling Callista. She reached out, fingering the velvet of Callista's sleeve. "Theron has sentimental taste, it seems, dressing up the help." "I didn't ask to be here," Callista said, holding her ground. "Oh, I'm sure," Vespera laughed lightly. "Just as I'm sure you didn't mean to be the only one conscious enough to perform mouth-to-mouth on the king." Callista felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I was saving his life. You were securing a position." Vespera leaned in close, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "Listen to me, girl. Theron is a creature of war and blood. He may feel indebted to you now, but gratitude in a wolf is a fleeting thing. Hunger lasts forever. Don't mistake his protection for affection. When the culprit is caught, you will be discarded. If you're lucky. And if I'm unlucky, then you'll end up like the last girl who thought she could tame him." Vespera pulled back, flashing a brilliant, fake smile. "Enjoy the velvet while it lasts." She swept out of the room, leaving a chill in the air that the fireplace couldn't touch. Callista sank onto the window seat. She looked out at the courtyard below. Soldiers were drilling, their breath pluming in the cold air. In the center of them stood Theron. Even from this distance, he was unmistakable. He moved with a brutal grace, disarming two guards simultaneously, with a sweep of his leg and a twist of his torso. He paused, looking up, his gaze locked onto her window. He knew she was watching. The door opened again. "The king requests your presence for the midday meal," Silas announced. "Does he ever just ask?" Callista sighed. No. The dining hall was a cavernous space, with a table long enough to seat 50, yet it was set for 2. Theron sat at the head, reading a scroll. He didn't look up as she sat down. "Eat," he commanded, gesturing to the spread of roasted venison and root vegetables. "I'm not hungry." Starving yourself won't make you harder to kill. It will just make you easier to drag away. Theron rolled the scroll and set it aside. "Vespera visited you." "She came to mark her territory," Callista said, grabbing a piece of bread and tearing it aggressively. "She thinks I'm trying to seduce you." Theron let out a short bark of laughter. It was a rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in years. "Vespera thinks everyone is trying to seduce me because she cannot conceive of a world where power isn't the ultimate aphrodisiac." He looked at her, his eyes softening slightly. "Did she threaten you?" "Implicitly." "She is on the list of suspects," Theron said casually, cutting his meat. "Her clan specializes in alchemy, the chemical used to weaken the ice. It was a sulfur-based compound found in the southern mines." "So arrest her," Callista said. "Politics, Callista. I cannot arrest a clan alpha without concrete proof, or I risk a civil war. I need her to make a mistake. I need her to think she is safe, that I am distracted." "Distracted by what?" Theron pointed his knife at her. "You." Callista stopped chewing. "So I am a bait. You want them to think you're infatuated with me, so they attack me instead of you?" "I want them to think I am weak," Theron corrected. "That my near-death experience has made me soft, that I have chosen a low-born savior over a strategic political alliance. It will enrage them. Rage makes people sloppy." "You are using me," Callista whispered. The realization hurt more than it should have. "I am keeping you alive," Theron said, his voice hard. "The moment you pulled me from that water, you became a symbol. To the pack, you are a hero. To my enemies, you are a loose end. If I cast you out, you die tonight. If I keep you close, you might die. But I will be there to kill whoever tries." He stood up and walked around the table. He stopped behind her chair. Callista stiffened, feeling the heat of him against her back. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Trust me, Callista. I play a cruel game, but I do not lose." "And what happens when the game is over?" she breathed, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "Then we see if there is anything left of us to salvage." He walked away, leaving her trembling. She looked down at her plate. Next to the goblet of wine, there was a small, white flower. A snowdrop. It was the flower that grew on the graves of the innocent. A warning? Or an apology? 3 days passed in a blur of tension. The palace was a maze of sharp glances and whispered rumors. Callista was paraded around on Theron's arm during court sessions, playing the part of the favored ward. She hated it. She hated the way he touched the small of her back. Possessive, firm, yet confusingly gentle. She hated that her body reacted to it, a traitorous warmth spreading through her veins every time he was near. But mostly, she hated the fear in her father's eyes when she saw him across the room. Aemon wouldn't even look at her. On the 4th night, a blizzard struck the mountain. The wind howled against the stone walls of the obsidian palace, burying the world in white. Theron had called a private council in his study, the inner circle only. Vespera was there, along with the Gamma, Silas and Callista. Theron paced before the fire. "The alchemist who sold the sulfur has been found," he announced. "Dead. Throat slit." Vespera sipped her wine, looking bored. How convenient. A dead end. Or a loose end tied up, Theron countered. He looked tired. The shadows under his eyes were deep. He hadn't slept, Callista realized. He had been guarding the door to her room every night. She had seen the shadow of his wolf form pacing the hallway. "We need to secure the perimeter," Silas said. "If they killed the alchemist inside the city walls, they are here." "They are in this room," Callista said. The silence was instant. All heads turned to her. "Careful, little girl," Vespera warned, her eyes flashing. "I don't mean physically," Callista said, her voice shaking but determined. She walked to the table where a map of the territory was spread out. "Theron, the king, said the ice was weakened at the center. But the cracks didn't start there. I was on the shore. I heard the sound before the fall. It started at the edge, near the docks." She pointed to the map. "Here, where the boats are moored." Theron moved to stand beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. The docks were guarded by the Gamma's unit. He turned his gaze slowly to the Gamma, an older wolf named Torian. Torian's face went pale. "My men were at their posts," Torian sputtered. "Your men were drunk on solstice wine," Callista said quietly. "I saw them. I saw crates being moved onto the ice an hour before the ceremony. I thought they were supplies for the fireworks." "Crates?" Theron asked. "What kind of crates?" "Heavy ones, marked with the sigil of the Western traders." Theron's face darkened. "Torian, did you authorize a shipment during the holy solstice?" I, Torian stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "It was just a favor. For a friend. He said it was spices." "Spices don't crack ice," Theron snarled. "Explosives do. Sonic charges." "I didn't know." Torian fell to his knees. "Alpha, I swear." "Your incompetence nearly cost me my life," Theron said, his voice deadly calm. "And it cost the lives of 3 of our elders, who succumbed to the cold later." "Theron." Callista touched his arm. The muscle was rock hard, vibrating with the urge to shift, to kill. "He didn't plant them. He's just a fool. The one who sent the crates. That's who you want." Theron looked down at her hand on his arm. The red haze in his eyes receded, replaced by a strange clarity. He covered her hand with his own. "You have a sharp eye, Callista Fire." "A sharp eye sees what is hidden," Vespera interrupted, standing up. "But it also makes you a target." Suddenly, the glass window shattered inward. The blizzard roared into the room, carrying with it not just snow, but 3 dark figures clad in white leather. Assassins, camouflaged against the storm. "Down!" Theron roared. He tackled Callista, shielding her body with his own, as a crossbow bolt slammed into the heavy oak table, exactly where she had been standing. Chaos erupted. Silas drew his blade, engaging the first assassin. Vespera shifted, her wolf form sleek and golden, tearing into the second. The third assassin lunged for Theron and Callista on the floor. Theron didn't have time to shift. He rolled onto his back, kicking the assassin in the chest, sending him flying into the fireplace. But the assassin was quick, scrambling out of the flames with a dagger gleaming with green liquid. Poison. Theron scrambled up, pulling Callista behind him. "Stay back!" The assassin lunged. Theron caught the wrist, the dagger inches from his eye. They struggled, a clash of strength and desperation. Callista looked around for a weapon. She saw the heavy iron poker by the fire. She grabbed it. It was heavy, hot to the touch. As Theron forced the assassin's arm back, Callista swung the poker with all her might, smashing it into the assassin's knee. The man screamed, his leg buckling. Theron used the opening to snap the man's wrist, driving the poisoned dagger into the assassin's own shoulder. The man convulsed and fell silent, the fast-acting neurotoxin stopping his heart in seconds. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the howling wind and heavy breathing. Theron turned to Callista. His chest was heaving, his shirt torn. There was a scratch on his cheek, bleeding sluggishly. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, gripping her shoulders. "No," she gasped, dropping the poker. "You?" "I'm fine." He looked at the dead assassin, then at the shattered window. "They weren't trying to kill me, Callista." He pulled the bolt from the table. It was tipped with a distinct blue feather. "They were aiming for you." Callista felt her knees give way. Theron caught her, pulling her against his chest. For the first time, he didn't feel like a king or a manipulator. He felt like a wall between her and the abyss. "Why?" she whispered against his chest. "Because you are the one solving the puzzle," Theron growled, looking over her head at Vespera and the terrified Gamma. "And because you are the only thing in this castle I care about keeping whole." The admission hung in the cold air, shocking them both. Theron stiffened, realizing what he had said. He didn't pull away, but the tension in his body changed. It wasn't fear anymore. It was possession. "Pack your things," Theron commanded the room, though his eyes were only on her. "We are leaving the palace. We are going to the hunting cabin in the high peaks." "Running?" Vespera scoffed, wiping blood from her mouth. "Hunting," Theron corrected. "They want a war? I'll give them one. But I will not fight it in a cage of their making." He looked down at Callista. "You're coming with me. I don't have a choice, do I?" "No," Theron said, sweeping her up into his arms, as if she weighed nothing. "Not anymore. The high peaks were a place where the world ended and the sky began. The air was thin, sharp enough to cut the lungs, and the silence was absolute. The hunting cabin was not a palace. It was a fortress of timber and stone, built into the side of a cliff, accessible only by a narrow, treacherous goat path that Silas had navigated with the grim determination of a man marching to war. Silas had left them at the door with supplies and a promise to return in 3 days with reinforcements. Now it was just them. Callista stood in the center of the main room. It was sparse. A stone hearth, a table, a few chairs, and a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. The wind howled outside, a beast clawing to get in. But the fire Theron had built roared with defiant heat. "Stop standing there like a statue," Theron grunted. He was sitting on a bench, pulling off his boots. His movements were stiff. The fight in the library had taken more out of him than he admitted. The poison from the assassin's dagger, though neutralized, had left him pale. "I'm not a statue," Callista said, moving to the hearth to warm her hands. "I'm just wondering where I'm supposed to sleep. There is one pallet in the loft." Theron looked up, his grey eyes heavy. "I am the king. I take the pallet. You take the floor." Callista turned to glare at him, but the retort died on her lips when she saw him wince as he pulled his shirt over his head. The bandage on his ribs was fresh, but the skin around the older wound, the one from the lake, was angry and red, and his shoulder, where the assassin had grappled him, was bruising black and blue. "You're bleeding again," she said, her voice softening. "It's nothing. It's not nothing if you get an infection and die up here. I'm not digging a grave in permafrost, Theron." She walked over to the supply pack Silas had left and rummaged for the medical kit. Finding a jar of salve and clean linen, she knelt before him. "Let me see." Theron went still. For a man who commanded armies, he looked strangely vulnerable sitting there, half naked in the firelight. He watched her hands as she untied the bandages. "You have gentle hands for someone who swings a fire poker like a war hammer," he murmured. Callista focused on the wound, applying the salve. "My mother taught me to heal. My father taught me to fight." "Aemon taught you to fight?" Theron sounded skeptical. "Aemon barely raises his voice." "Aemon taught me to survive," Callista corrected, her eyes meeting his. "He said that because I was born without the shifting ability, I had to be twice as fast and 3 times as smart as any wolf in the pack. Theron's hand shot out, gripping her wrist. Not hurting, just holding. You can't shift? No. The gene skipped me. I'm human in everything but bloodline. She tried to pull away, shame heating her neck. It was the great failing of her life. The reason she was just the Beta's daughter and not a warrior in her own right. That explains the water, Theron said, his voice low, thoughtful. A shifter in wolf form would have weighed too much to tread water for that long. A shifter in human form would have succumbed to the thermal shock faster. Your human metabolism. It saved you. It saved us. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing the scarred knuckles where the ice had torn her skin. Callista's breath hitched. The room suddenly felt very small. The fire crackled, popping loudly, but she couldn't look away from his eyes. They weren't predatory now. They were hungry, yes, but for something else. You are not less, Callista, he whispered against her skin. You are extraordinary. The kiss was a spark that landed in dry tinder. Callista didn't think. She moved. She leaned in, and Theron met her halfway. His lips were hot, demanding, tasting of wine and smoke. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her between his knees. The kiss deepened, becoming a desperate, consuming thing. It was an release of days of fear, of the adrenaline of the assassination attempt, of the confusing, tangled web of duty and desire. Theron groaned low in his throat, his hand sliding up her back, tangling in her hair. He pulled her flush against him, his skin burning through her thin shirt. For a moment, she forgot he was the king. She forgot the danger. There was only the heat of him, the hard planes of his chest, the way he made her feel like she was the only fire in a frozen world. He broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers, both of them gasping for air. "This is dangerous," he rasped. "The assassins are outside," Callista whispered, her hand still resting on his shoulders. This feels like the only safe place." Theron closed his eyes, a look of pained restraint on his face. "If I take you to that pallet, Callista, I will not be able to let you go when the storm clears. You will be mine. Not a ward, not a savior. Mine. Maybe I don't want to be let go." Theron looked at her then, a raw intensity in his gaze that shook her to her core. "You don't know what you're asking. To be with me is to have a target painted on your back for the rest of your life. I think the target is already there, Theron." He stared at her for a heartbeat longer, then let out a ragged breath and pulled her back in. This time he didn't stop. He carried her up the ladder to the loft, the firelight casting long shadows against the timber roof. That night, the blizzard raged outside, burying the world in white silence. But inside the cabin, the ice around the Alpha King's heart finally shattered. Morning brought a blinding, brilliant sun that reflected off the snow with painful intensity. Callista woke alone in the loft. The pallet was cold beside her, but the smell of brewing coffee drifted up from below. She stretched, her body aching in new, pleasant ways, memories of the night flooding back. A blush warmed her cheeks. She quickly dressed and climbed down the ladder. Theron was sitting at the table, fully dressed, sharpening his sword. The domesticity of the scene was shattered by the look on his face. It was stone, cold, impenetrable stone. "Theron?" He didn't look up. "Silas is back early. He brought news." Callista looked at the door. It was unbarred. Silas must have come and gone while she slept. "Is it bad?" "It is catastrophic." Theron stood up, sheathing the sword with a violent snap. He walked to the window, keeping his back to her. The interrogation of the assassin's contact in the city yielded a name. The one who paid for the sulfur, the one who provided the schedule of the patrols so the crates could be moved. A knot of dread formed in Callista's stomach. Who? Theron turned slowly. His eyes were devoid of the warmth from the night before. They were the eyes of a judge pronouncing a death sentence. Aemon. The world tilted. Callista grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. No, that's a lie. Is it? Theron threw a leather satchel onto the table. It slid across and hit the edge. Silas found this hidden under the floorboards of your father's office. Inside are letters from the Western traders, bank drafts, and a detailed map of the lake's stress points. Callista ripped the satchel open. Her hands shook so hard she could barely hold the papers. She recognized the handwriting immediately. The looping L, the sharp T. It was her father's script. Payment received. The king falls at solstice. No, she whispered, the paper crumpling in her fist. He wouldn't. He's a coward, Theron. He's a bureaucrat. He doesn't have the stomach for murder. He has the stomach for survival, Theron said coldly. Maybe he thought removing me was the only way to save the pack from my tyranny. Maybe he was promised the alpha position if he cleared the way for a puppet king. He sent me to the infirmary, Callista cried, tears stinging her eyes. He was worried about me. He was worried you survived, Theron countered, stepping closer. Think, Callista. Why did he try to stop you from coming to my chambers that first night? Why did he look so terrified? Not because he feared for your virtue, but because he feared what you might say. What you might have seen. Stop it! She covered her ears. He's my father! He is a traitor! Theron roared, the sound shaking the small cabin. And by the laws of the Silver Blood, the family of a traitor shares their fate. Silence crashed down on the room. Callista looked at him, her heart breaking. Are you saying you think I knew? That last night was what? An interrogation? Theron's jaw worked. He looked away, unable to hold her gaze. I don't know what to think. You are his daughter. You live in his house. How could you not know he was planning regicide? Because I was busy trying to be the perfect daughter, so he wouldn't look at me with disappointment for being born wrong, Callista screamed, the truth pouring out of her. I didn't know. I swear on my life, Theron, I didn't know. Theron stared at her, the conflict raging in his eyes. He wanted to believe her. She could see it. But he was a king first and a man second. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Silas is waiting at the base of the trail, Theron said, his voice flat. We are going back to the capital. Aemon has been arrested. He faces a public tribunal at dawn. I have to speak to him, Callista said, wiping her tears. I have to know why. You will speak to no one, Theron commanded. You will be placed under guard in the tower until the tribunal determines your involvement. The tower? She laughed bitterly. Yesterday I was your savior. Last night I was your lover. Today I am your prisoner. Today you are a liability, Theron said, opening the door to the biting wind. Let's go. The journey back to the Obsidian Palace was a funeral march. Callista rode behind Theron, staring at his rigid back, wishing the cold would numb the ache in her chest. When they arrived, the atmosphere was suffocating. The news of Aemon's treachery had spread. The pack lined the streets, their faces twisted with anger. They threw stones and clumps of mud at Callista as she passed. Traitor's spawn! Witch! Kill her! Theron did not look back. He did not raise a hand to stop them. He rode straight to the courtyard, dismounted, and handed the reins to a stable boy. Take her to the North Tower, he ordered Silas. Double guard, no visitors. Theron, please, Callista begged as Silas took her arm. Let me talk to you. He didn't acknowledge her. He walked up the steps of the palace and disappeared inside, the heavy doors slamming shut behind him, effectively severing the bond they had forged in the mountains. The North Tower was cold, damp, and lonely, For hours, Callista paced the small circular room. She replayed every conversation with her father, looking for signs, for cracks in his mask. She found plenty. The hushed meetings, the sudden influx of coin, the way he would look at the castle with a mixture of longing and hatred. He had done it, and he had used her ignorance as a shield. Night fell. The door to her cell opened. It wasn't a guard, it was Theron. He wore his formal armor, the silver wolf crest gleaming on his chest. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red. He carried a cloak, a heavy, nondescript traveler's cloak. "Put this on," he said quietly. "Are you taking me to the execution?" Callista asked, her voice trembling. "I am taking you to the tunnels." "What?" Theron crossed the room and grabbed her shoulders. "Listen to me closely, because I will only say this once. The council has already voted. Vespera pushed for it. They want a purge. They want Aemon dead, and they want you dead to ensure the bloodline of the traitor is wiped out. But I saved you. It doesn't matter. Fear is stronger than gratitude. They think you saved me to get close, to finish the job later." Theron's grip tightened. "I cannot stop them, Callista. If I veto the council on a matter of treason, I lose the pack. Civil war breaks out, and thousands die." "So you're here to kill me yourself?" She looked up at him, searching for the man who had held her by the fire. "I am here to exile you." He pulled the hood of the cloak over her head. "There is a tunnel behind the wine cellar. It leads to the river. There is a boat waiting. Inside is gold, supplies, and a letter of safe passage to the human lands in the south. You're sending me away?" Tears spilled over her cheeks. "I am saving your life," Theron said, his voice cracking. "It is the only way. Come with me," she whispered. "Leave the crown. Leave the politics. Come with me." Theron closed his eyes, and for a moment she saw the yearning there, raw and painful. "I am the Alpha. I cannot leave my pack to be devoured by wolves like Vespera. My fate is here." He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small object. It was a ring, a band of twisted iron and gold. He pressed it into her hand. "This was my mother's. Sell it only if you are starving. Keep it if you can. Theron, go!" He pushed her toward the door. "Silas is waiting at the tunnel entrance. He will ensure you get to the boat. Don't look back, Callista. Never look back." "I love you," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Theron went rigid. He looked at her, and his expression was a mask of tragedy. "Then forgive me for what I have to do tomorrow." He turned and walked away, leaving the door open. Callista ran. She ran through the stone corridors, down the spiraling stairs, past the startled guards who had been ordered to look the other way. She met Silas in the cellar. He didn't speak, just handed her a lantern and pointed to the dark mouth of the tunnel. She ran until her lungs burned, until the smell of the river replaced the smell of stone and treachery. She found the boat. She pushed off into the icy current, the water that had once been her enemy, now her only escape. As the current took her, she looked back at the obsidian palace high on the cliff. A single horn blast echoed through the valley, the sound of a tribunal beginning, or an execution ending. She clutched the ring to her chest and sobbed, drifting into the darkness, a girl without a father, without a home, and without the king who had broken her heart to keep it beating. But as the palace faded from view, a spark of anger ignited in the ashes of her grief. Theron had told her to survive. He had told her she was extraordinary. She wiped her face. She wouldn't just survive. She would find the truth about the Western traders. She would find out who had really pulled her father's strings. And she would come back. Not as a savior. Not as a victim. But as a storm. 6 months had passed since Callista Fire vanished into the river's darkness. In the Silverblood Kingdom, rumors had turned her into a ghost story, the traitor's daughter who drowned escaping justice. But in the human port city of Oakhaven, Callista was very much alive. She stood in the shadows of a warehouse district, the smell of salt and tar heavy in the air. She looked different. Her hair was cut short, practical, and sharp. Her velvet dresses were gone, replaced by worn leather breeches and a heavy coat. She wasn't the Beta's daughter anymore. She was a phantom haunting the trade routes. "You're sure this is the shipment?" she asked, her voice low. Beside her stood an old dock worker. She had patched up a week ago after a crane accident. He nodded nervously. "Aye, miss. The Gilded Serpent. Arrived from the southern clans this morning. They say it's carrying grain, but the crates are too heavy." Callista slipped him a silver coin, earned from selling herbal remedies, not Theron's ring. That ring still hung around her neck, a heavy reminder of the promise she had made to herself. Come back as a storm. She waited until the moon was obscured by clouds before slipping past the guards. Her lack of a wolf scent was her greatest weapon here. She was invisible to their noses. She moved through the warehouse, checking crates until she found them. The sigil of the Western traders was burned into the wood. She pried one open. It wasn't grain, it wasn't spices, it was weaponry. High-grade steel stamped with the crest of the southern clans, and vials of the same volatile sulfur compound that had cracked the ice at Lake Solstice. And there, tucked into a manifest pouch, was the smoking gun. A letter of credit authorizing the purchase of mining supplies for the destabilization of the Northern Throne. It was signed not by a proxy, but with a wax seal. A seal depicting a viper coiled around a rose. "Vespera. Got you," Callista whispered. Her father, Aemon, had been a pawn. He had taken payments, yes, likely blackmailed or tricked into thinking he was funding infrastructure, but the architect of the regicide was Vespera. She had orchestrated the ice collapse to kill the Council and Theron, intending to swoop in as the grieving, capable leader of the strongest remaining clan. When Callista had saved Theron, Vespera had pivoted, framing Aemon to clear the board and isolating the king. Callista shoved the documents into her tunic. She had the proof. Now she just had to survive the journey back. As she turned to leave, a hand clamped over her mouth. She didn't panic. She drove her elbow back into a soft gut, spinning and drawing the small dagger she now carried. "Easy, easy, girl." It wasn't a guard. It was Silas. Callista froze, the blade an inch from his throat. The high guard looked ragged, his armor scuffed, his beard overgrown. He looked like a man who had been hunting for a ghost. "Silas," she breathed, lowering the weapon. "Did he send you to kill me?" "He sent me to find you," Silas grunted, rubbing his ribs, "though he didn't expect you to be breaking into a smuggling ring." "Why?" "Because he's losing, Callista." Silas's face was grim. Vespera has tightened the noose. The Council has declared that for the safety of the realm, the Alpha King must mate with an alpha female to produce a strong heir. The wedding is in 3 days. Callista felt the blood drain from her face. He agreed. He stalled. For 6 months, he has stalled. But he is out of time. He told me to find you and give you this. Silas reached into his pocket and pulled out a pouch of gold. He wants you to disappear further, across the sea. He says it's not safe on this continent anymore. Callista looked at the gold, then at the manifesto in her pocket. She felt the weight of Theron's ring against her heart. He was trying to save her again. He was sacrificing his happiness, his freedom, to keep her safe. She slapped the gold out of Silas's hand. The coins scattered across the dock like falling stars. "Tell me you have horses," she said, her eyes blazing with a fury that made the large wolf flinch. Yes. 2. Good. Callista tightened her belt. "We ride for the Obsidian Palace. I'm not going across the sea, Silas. I'm going to a wedding." The great hall of the Obsidian Palace was draped in banners of black and gold, the colors of House Wolf combined with the Southern Viper. It looked less like a wedding and more like a coronation of conquerors. Theron stood at the altar. He wore the ceremonial white furs of the Alpha, but he looked like a man walking to the gallows. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. The fire that Callista had ignited in him at the cabin was gone, replaced by a cold, dead ash. Beside him, Vespera was radiant. She wore a gown of shimmering gold scales, her smile triumphant. She had won. The Beta was dead, the king was broken, and the crown was hers. The high priest raised his hands. "We gather under the gaze of the moon to bind these two bloodlines, Alpha to Alpha, strength to strength." The crowd was silent. The pack did not look happy. They looked fearful. The purge following Aemon's execution had been brutal. Anyone who questioned Vespera's influence had disappeared. "Do you, Theron Wolf, accept this union?" the priest asked. Theron looked out at the sea of faces. He opened his mouth to speak the words that would seal his fate. Boom! The heavy double doors of the great hall didn't just open, they were thrown wide with a force that shook the stone. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was not an army. It was one woman. Callista was dressed in red, a deep, blood-red gown she had stolen from a merchant's caravan on the road. It was torn at the hem, stained with mud, and she wore men's riding boots beneath it. She looked wild. She looked magnificent. "I object," her voice rang out, clear and unwavering. A gasp rippled through the room. "Callista," Theron whispered. The name was a prayer. Life rushed back into his eyes, sudden and violent. "Seize her!" Vespera shrieked, her composure shattering. "She is a traitor, a ghost. Kill her!" Guards rushed forward, but Silas stepped out from behind Callista, his sword drawn. "Stand down!" he roared with the authority of the High Guard. "By the right of the challenge, let her speak." "She has no right," Vespera hissed. "She is a Beta." "I am the witness," Callista said, walking down the aisle. The guards hesitated, parting before her. She didn't look at them. She looked only at Theron. "I am the witness to the crime that nearly killed our king." She reached the altar and threw the bundle of documents onto the stone floor. The manifest spilled open. The letter with the Viper seal lay exposed for the council elders to see. Vespera didn't just capitalize on the tragedy, Callista declared, her voice rising. She engineered it. She bought the sulfur. She hired the assassins, and she framed my father to cover her tracks. Vespera turned pale, then red. "Lies! Forgeries planted by a desperate exile?" "Check the seal," Callista challenged the priest. "Check the signature. It is blood ink. It cannot be forged." The high priest picked up the letter. He adjusted his spectacles, his hands trembling. He looked at Vespera, then at Theron. "It is authentic," the priest whispered. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the static of a coming storm. Theron turned to Vespera. The look on his face was terrifying. It wasn't rage, it was absolute, icy clarity. "You killed my people," he said softly. "You killed Callista's father." "I did what was necessary," Vespera screamed, backing away. "You were weak. You were ruling with mercy. The pack needs strength." "The pack needs loyalty," Theron roared. The sound ripped through his human form. Bones cracked, fur sprouted. The transformation was instantaneous, fueled by months of suppressed fury. A massive black wolf stood where the king had been. Vespera didn't cower. She snarled, her own form shifting. A golden, sleek wolf, smaller but faster. "Kill them all!" Vespera's wolf howled, a mental command that went out to her loyal southern soldiers disguised as guests. Swords were drawn. The wedding turned into a war zone. Chaos erupted. The great hall became a kaleidoscope of steel and fur. Theron lunged for Vespera, a clash of titans that sent the altar crashing down. Callista ducked as a southern soldier swung a mace at her head. She rolled, grabbing a discarded ceremonial spear. She wasn't a shifter, but she had learned to fight in the alleyways of Oak Haven. She drove the spear into the soldier's foot, then slammed the hilt into his temple as he fell. "Get to the king!" Silas yelled, cutting a path through the melee. Callista scanned the room. Theron and Vespera were locked in a vicious cycle of snapping jaws and tearing claws. Vespera was fast, using the debris of the wedding feast to keep distance, slashing at Theron's already scarred flank. But Theron was distracted. He was trying to fight Vespera while keeping an eye on Callista, shielding her from the fray. "Don't look at me! Fight her!" Callista screamed. Vespera saw the distraction. She feinted left, then lunged. Not at Theron, but at a supporting pillar. She slammed into it with earth-shattering force. The heavy stone brazier hanging above wobbled and fell, aiming straight for Callista. "Callista!" Theron roared, throwing himself human shield, or wolf shield, over her. The brazier crashed down, burying them both in a cloud of dust and hot coals. The fighting stopped. Even the southern soldiers paused. "Theron!" Callista coughed, pushing the debris aside. The great black wolf lay still, pinned under the iron rim of the brazier. He was breathing, but barely. Blood matted his fur. Vespera stood over them, shifting back to her human form. She was naked, covered in blood, panting triumphantly. She picked up a sword from a fallen guard. "How poetic!" she spat. "Dying together in the ashes!" She raised the sword to deliver the killing blow to the unconscious king. Callista looked at Theron. She looked at the ring on the chain around her neck. She looked at the fire still burning in the overturned brazier, come back as a storm. Callista didn't scream. She didn't beg. She grabbed a handful of the volatile sulfur powder she had confiscated from the crates, the pouch she had kept on her belt. "Hey, Vespera!" The alpha female looked down. Callista threw the powder into the smouldering coals between them. Foom! A blinding flash of white-hot chemical fire erupted. It wasn't an explosion large enough to bring down the hall, but it was bright enough to blind sensitive wolf eyes. Vespera screamed, dropping the sword and clutching her face, blinded by the sudden flare. Callista didn't hesitate. She scrambled over the debris, picked up the fallen sword. Heavy, far too heavy for her, but lifted by pure adrenaline, and swung. She didn't aim to kill. She aimed to disarm. The flat of the blade cracked against Vespera's knee, shattering the bone. Vespera collapsed, howling in pain. Callista stood over her, the sword point resting on Vespera's chest. Her red dress was singed, her face smeared with soot. She looked every inch a queen. "Yield," Callista commanded. Her voice didn't tremble. Vespera squinted up at her, pain and shock warring on her face. A beta. She had been bested by a beta. "I... yield!" Vespera gasped. The silence returned to the hall. Behind Callista, the rubble shifted. Theron limped out from the wreckage. He shifted back to human form, naked and bleeding, but standing tall. He looked at Vespera, broken on the floor. Then he looked at Callista. He didn't look at her with gratitude. He looked at her with awe. He walked over, took the sword gently from her shaking hands, and tossed it aside. Then, in front of the council, the southern clans, and the entire court, the Alpha King fell to his knees. Not from injury, but in devotion. "You saved me," he whispered, pressing his forehead against her stomach. Again, Callista wove her fingers through his hair. "I told you, Theron, I don't leave things unfinished." The snow had melted from the peaks of the Silverblood territory, replaced by the blooming wild flowers of spring. The obsidian palace was no longer a place of fear. The windows had been repaired, letting in the light. Callista stood on the balcony, watching the lake below. It was blue now, calm and serene. Thinking about the water? Theron stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He looked healthier, the shadows under his eyes gone. He wore a simple tunic, the heavy crown left on a table inside. I was thinking about the Count. Callista smiled, leaning back into him. 16. 16? I saved 15 wolves that night, but I think in the end, I saved myself too. Theron turned her around. He kissed her, soft and lingering. There were no more assassins in the shadows. Vespera was in the deep dungeons, stripped of her rank. The Council had rewritten the laws. An alpha could mate with whomever he chose, for strength was not in bloodlines, but in the spirit. Marry me, Theron said. It wasn't a command, it was a request. Callista touched the ring that still hung around her neck, his mother's ring. I'm just a beta, Theron. I can't give you shifter heirs. We will adopt, Theron said firmly, or we will leave the throne to the most worthy, regardless of birth. But I will not rule another day without you by my side. You are my mate, Callista, my equal, my storm. Callista looked at him, seeing the man who had frozen for her, the king who had exiled her to save her, and the wolf who knelt before her. Yes, she whispered. Fate, it seemed, was not written in the stars or the ice. It was written in the choices we make, to dive into the dark, to forgive the unforgivable, and to love without permission. If you enjoyed this story of forbidden love, betrayal, and a heroine who saves the hero, please like, share, and subscribe for more dramatic romances. Let me know in the comments, would you have forgiven the king?